All right, guys, if you want to start making your way to your classes, I would appreciate our crew in here. You want to get this going around, keep it going around?
I'm going to use it for.
All right. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, have I ever picked you? I'm sorry if I haven't. Hey, it doesn't work like that. It's random for a reason. All right, we are 2 months away from completing the one-year Bible. We are making progress, and officially, if you read yesterday's reading, you're done with Jeremiah. So, yeah, on to Lamentations. Yeah, different excitement. I don't know if excitement's even the right word or not. But it does feel good to be done with Jeremiah. It feels like in Jeremiah for a really long time. And kind of mixing it up a little bit in the New Testament as well, now that we're into Titus. And actually, I think we read all of Titus by the end of last night as well. So lots and lots of good stuff. Basket's coming around. Make sure it just kind of keeps on going, and I'll try and remember to pick it up from you guys in a minute. But yeah, Jeremiah, we read the last, 13 chapters this week, Jeremiah 39 through the end of the book, which would be the end of 52. So we finished it out. Like I said last week, where we're at with the story of Jeremiah for the rest of the book, kind of where we ended up is he's in captivity for the entire end of this book, talking about the history that's going on around him. Chapter 39 is the fall of Jerusalem, and I think we talked about this kind of when we started in Jeremiah, that if you're following along with the prophets and where we've been, this is before where we were in the timeline, right? So now we're looking at the fall of Jerusalem that we were already talking about with, who was it? Isaiah? Was it Isaiah that we were talking? Am I wrong? Isaiah? I think Isaiah is the one that we talked about this in some context. This is Jeremiah. This is before it's happening for him. So Jerusalem's captured in chapter 39 by Babylon, like God had been telling him was going to happen. King Nebuchadnezzar captures the whole city, isn't in charge of everybody, and that's not good because he's a foreign king from Babylon, right? Jeremiah, who's been in prison where we left off last week, is released by the Babylonians, and he's given the option to stay there in Jerusalem or stay in the land or go to Babylon. And he chooses to remain in Judah. Thank you, Sandra. And so he remains with his people, even though they are all under captivity as well. So I don't know what much of the difference really is, except for location, and that's in chapters 40 and 41. We have a new governor of the Babylonians, but he is assassinated. And this is just there's just lots of chaos going on with both the Babylonians and Jerusalem and the nation of Judah, and all of that. So by the time we get to chapter 42 and 43, again, we're cruising along through the last little section of Jeremiah. It actually moves pretty quickly here at the end. Even though Jeremiah has been warning the people about staying in Judah and not fleeing, and he set the example by not going to Babylon, a group of Jews want to flee to Egypt and be kind of like the surviving remnant in Egypt. And so Jeremiah goes with those Jews, and they flee to Egypt to escape the Babylonians. But by the time we get to chapter 44, we see that was not God's plan for them, and they get judged for it, right? So God's judgment on Egypt and the Jews that went there, that fled there, as they continue to... You'd think they'd get it, but they still haven't got it. They continue to worship false gods and false idols, and as they get to Egypt, they just choose the new flavor of the week and continue on. And so they're still not being righteous before God, not worshiping God, and so they're kind of in the same boat, new location. Not a lot has changed with their actual relationship with God and reverence to Him. And so by the time we get to chapter 46 and kind of the next few chapters through 51, Jeremiah continues more of the same message that he's been telling them for years now about all of the judgment that God is going to give not only to them, but to all the nations if they don't turn to Him, and if they don't stop worshiping these false idols, and if they don't, make it right with God. And so he goes through the list: Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Babylon, all of them. And his whole point with this is that God is powerful and ruler over all nations. It doesn't matter which one you flee to. He's the all-seeing and all-knowing no matter where you're at. And he's saying that while in Egypt. So turn to God. Turn to God and He'll take care of you. But if you remember, we talked about it last week. They were going to be in captivity for a set amount of time. I think it was 70 years. It's kind of one of those Bible times, isn't it? 70 years. And so at some point, Babylon is going to fall. Their capture of the nation of Judah is going to fade away, if you want to use that word. But Babylon's going to have an impending destruction soon. And that's kind of where we're getting towards the end of the book in chapter 51. And by the time we get to chapter 52, we get this account of the fall of Jerusalem. Like I said, the events that have happened before we've already talked about, and we're out of order now, but now Jerusalem is fallen. So when we read about rebuilding the temple, rebuilding Jerusalem, that's what we're talking about after this great destruction that has taken place. But finally, we see some of the fall that was promised of Babylon coming to fruition for the people of Judah, for the Jews. But things are not great still because the whole city, the whole temple, their whole life is destroyed after being in captivity. And so that's kind of where the book of Jeremiah ends. Things are better, but things aren't great because they have been enslaved for so many years. They haven't been able to be their own people, and even if they do go home, it's completely destroyed, and there's nothing really to go back to. So the main themes of Jeremiah stay true throughout the end of the book. I think that's pretty evident when you see the whole entire time that Jeremiah is telling them, even when they go to Egypt, to turn back to God, stop worshiping idols. But we never see their full reverence back to God because we see them now in a state of despair in Jerusalem and Judea. And the story continues on no matter what Jeremiah continued to say until the very end of this book. So that's just kind of my quick little summary of the last, 11 chapters or 13 chapters that we read this week. What are some things, did you guys see anything in Jeremiah that you wanted to share? I'll run back here to you, Dennis. Go for it.
Well, while I'm reading those kind of books over and over again, it's just like your wheels are spinning, you break apart and you fix it, and that's something else. But I don't see them running to them other places so they can serve God better or religious freedom or anything like that. It's so they can go somewhere else, like you said, go somewhere else and worship idols some more.
Yeah.
And they think that just because they're called Hebrews or Israelites or whatever, that they got God's favor, but every place they go, they're building a golden calf or joining in with another one, and then they get persecuted there or enslaved or annihilated or something. They just move somewhere else and do the same thing over and over and over. It wasn't like they wanted to go somewhere where they could be righteous. Mm-hmm. They went where they could be at least temporarily safer.
And it's a little foreshadowing. Cale's right behind you too, and he'll move microphone around. A little foreshadowing of how it's not the nation or the people, but the righteousness of the people. And we think, oh, that's a new theme that comes in the New Testament. That's what Jesus comes to say, right? No, that's a theme that God's been saying for a long time. Just they were easily blindsided by the fact, well, we're God's people, so I guess it doesn't matter if we really worship Him. No, that's not the answer that they were supposed to get out of that. All right, go Nancy, and then we'll go Terry after that.
Nebuchadnezzar had his captain of the guard. He left in Judah. He left the poorest of the people in Judah. He left them and gave them the vineyards and the fields at the same time to take care of. And the king of Babylon gave command concerning Jeremiah. He basically set up something good for them there in Judah, and they didn't flee to Egypt because they just wanted to flee to Egypt, because they were told by Jeremiah, stay here, and that they would have had a great life. They could have continued worshiping God in Judah. They were given the vineyards and everything. They were set up really good. And then I don't know who, I can't find out here, where the people came in and they killed the people that Nebuchadnezzar had set up to oversee Judah, and they forced those people to go to Egypt. I can't find where it is, but they took all of those people and they took Jeremiah with them. They didn't. A lot of those people in Jeremiah did not go to Egypt willingly, and the thing is they were afraid that they were going to be persecuted, even though Jeremiah told them, no, stay in Judah. Take care of the land, worship God, stay in Judah. But they wouldn't listen to Jeremiah, and they all went away to Egypt to turn around and worship gods. It's just another example where they didn't listen. They didn't listen to God's chosen prophet. I mean,
yeah.
So many times Jeremiah prophesies, and you're a liar, and they do the opposite. And I'm like shaking my head, like, good grief.
Like people, we still do that sometimes to this day, right? But yeah, you read kind of that section that Nancy's talking about, and instead of listening to Jeremiah, who is the voice of God, they even recognize that, and they know that, and still deny what God's saying through him, right? It's almost like, well, politically we have to go, right? Politically is kind of the idea that I get, is like, okay, we're in captivity here, things were good, but now the people that were making it good for us have been killed, and now things aren't going to be good because we can't trust in God for him to make them good. They would never say that. So it's all this mindset culturally, politically, where they're at, which is crazy, by the way. This is a crazy time for them. But still, no matter what is going through your brain as the human, and in this case, the people of Judah, people of Jerusalem, God's direction is going to be more powerful than whatever political or dangerous things you think are happening right around you. So, yeah, that's
It's
interesting thing.
right here in Jeremiah, 43. When Jeremiah finished speaking all the people and these words of the Lord, the God, which the Lord their God had sent. Anyways, they said, you are telling a lie. The Lord your God did not send you to say, do not go to Egypt to live there. They're saying, God tells them, do not go to Egypt. And then Johanan, the son of Kerara, and all the commanders of the forces and all the people did not obey the voice of the Lord to remain in the land of Judah. But Johanan, the son of Kerara, and all the commanders of the forces took all the remnant of Judah who had returned to live in the land of Judah from all the nations to which they had been driven. So these guys had come back to Judah, and now they're taking them to Egypt. The men, women, and children, the princesses, and every person whom Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had left with Gedaliah, the son of Echiam, son of Shaphnah, also Jeremiah the prophet, and Baruch, the son of Nehemiah. So they took them. It's like, to me, they're forcing them to go to Egypt.
Yeah, and those are their own people, really, kind of forcing themselves, right? Good job with names, by the way. That was a good effort. I don't know if you're doing them right or not.
I doubt I am.
All right, Terry has a comment up front here, Kayla, if you want to, because we didn't get you. I knew you're here, but we didn't get you. All right. Go for it, Terry.
I think it's really cool in 52, the very last paragraph, all about the fact that Jehoiakim is in prison and the king of Babylon releases him. And I think there's probably a sermon somewhere in verse 34, because it says, day by day, the king of Babylon gave Jehoiakim a regular allowance as long as he lived till the day of his death. The day by day. I mean, you had to imagine that every day when he woke up, he was curious, like, was the king of Babylon still the king of Babylon?
Yeah.
You know, had he been replaced or assassinated or died, because that could change my life? He had to rely on him each and every day,
Yeah.
which is exactly what we should be doing. But can you imagine how tough that was?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard that's the very last line kind of caught me off guard last night when Courtney and I were reading. I was like, okay, now who was that was being provided for? Yeah, anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting too. Nancy, go for it. Not here. Not in Jeremiah's book. Yeah. We'll go for it. Sandra. Mm-hmm. But we don't, yeah. That's just kind of the end of the book, and then we get a little history cap at the end. Go for it, Sandra.
I thought it was interesting in Jeremiah 44, talking about how the women would not give up their gods. But then again, it made me think of how God would tell the men, the Israelites, do not take women from foreign countries, because they still worship their idols. And they had such influence over the men, they helped bring them down. So women have power.
Amen. No, a continual problem almost, isn't it? Here you go, Cal.
That's right.
No, it's like this is the problem that they keep running into over and over again. Yeah, absolutely. All right, anything else in Jeremiah? It is Dennis has got one. It is a good book, even though it's long. I think that's kind of the hardest part about it. It's the broadest definition you could ever give for the Bible is that it's a history book above anything else. I mean, yeah, it's an adventure book, it's a murder mystery, it's a love story, it's all of those things, but it's in the context of it is a complete history book. And so sometimes when we are running through some of this complete history from the perspective of a prophet of God and, people of Judah and Jerusalem and all this stuff, it's like, whew, that's a lot. But it's just because it's a lot of content. Yeah, absolutely. Go for it, Dennis.
I think it was Jeremiah. I noticed this week there's at least two of them. I'll double check that. The names are common. There's a couple, three Jesuses in the Bible. Lots of Jesses and Justins and Justices and so on. They're common Jewish names, just like John, Bill, and Mike and Bob in America. And but anyway, yeah, it's a lot of repetition. But if there's a general message, I would say that God sends prophets to say don't when you're going down a wrong pathway, and you're going to pay rewards or reap blessings if you defy his prophets. And of course, we have his prophets in our throughout 66 books of our Bible.
Absolutely. And they're still valuable for us today. Nancy and then Terry. Good stuff. I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about at the end of the book, so that's good.
When I read these, I read these, I try to put myself in the time frame that it's being written and who's writing it. And so when I read a Psalm of David, I'm thinking about everything that's happened, and all the judges and where his point in time is. But I noticed Psalm 90 was written by Moses. And so that was, this one's written by Moses. So then I had Then I had to take my mind several hundred years before David
Sure.
to get myself in the right mind frame of when Moses is writing this.
I think Terry's got another comment up here too. Did you have another one, Dennis? Or? Okay, well, you can do Dennis first if it's on your way. There you go.
We were talking about the end of the book in chapter 52 a while ago. Yeah, it's at the beginning of 52 about there being two Jeremiahs at least. Sound like one is Grandpa.
Yeah, it's a valuable. Again, kind of the history thing. Now we can tag along with where we're at in the story. Absolutely. Go for it, Terry.
I think it's interesting that we've talked about Jeremiah being a bit of a depressing book. in some ways, and yet my very favorite verse is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And it goes on, then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord.
It's got to be, it was probably 2 weeks ago, I think, Courtney, you made a comment about Jeremiah 29. And it, obviously, this is Jeremiah saying this to the people of Judah. That's the context that we're in. But is it still valuable for us today to look at Jeremiah 29:11 and think that God has plans for us if we trust in Him? That's the Cliff Notes version, right? If we truly trust in Him, He has good plans for us. Yeah, even though that was written for the people of Judah and the people in, about to be in captivity from the Babylonians and all of this stuff, it's still encouraging for us to continue as Christians today, even though it was written to Jews, right? And so I think part of the thing I said on that was, so you can't really pick one or the other. It's fruitful for both. Yeah, Courtney's right behind you if you just want to pass the microphone behind you. Kinsley. Yeah.
Hope. Yeah, I just want to reiterate. Yeah, and I think the important part is He has plans for us, not we have plans for Him. So even if my dream is to own a pumpkin patch someday, he has a different plan. Their plan for the Israelites at the time was to put them in captivity for 70 years, but they still had hope and a future.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to 2 Timothy. Last week we read the entire book of 1 Timothy, right there, kind of the last half of the week. This week we read the entire book of 2 Timothy at the beginning of the week, and then the entire book of Titus at the end. And so we got kind of a double shot of some similar things. I don't know if you guys thought that when you were reading, when you transitioned from Timothy to Titus, but we'll talk about Titus in a second. I won't get ahead of myself. Both of these are letters from Paul, though. And like I've said multiple times, you've got your typical Paul intro that's always encouraging, always uplifting, and telling them that he's praying for them, and he can't wait to see him again and be with you and be strong. If you remember, Timothy is kind of the guy that's leading a church, right? And so that's the context that Paul is writing to this guy who he kind of sees as a son in the faith, right? And I said this in 1 Timothy 2. We often think that, Timothy's like 12 years old when Paul's writing this, but Timothy's like a full-grown man working with the church, doing ministry work, if you want to use it like that. So this is the second letter after what we read last week. As we get to chapter 2 there, after the greeting and all of that stuff, Paul is talking to Timothy about hard times when they come, hardships, if you want to call it that, and uses a lot of metaphors about staying strong. He uses this metaphor of being like a soldier or being an athlete or a hardworking farmer to endure. Endure the hardship for the sake of what's to come, basically, and for the sake of sharing the gospel. An encouragement to anybody. Again, this is written to Timothy in the church, but this is written to the church. This is an encouragement to anybody, because I don't know about you, but sometimes you face times that are harder than others when you're trying to live your life for Christ, right? And that's exactly what Paul is talking about the hardship. And he encourages Timothy, no matter what comes along, no matter what hardship comes along, stick to God's word and teach it accurately. If there was a simple answer for anything, that's it right there, right? Stick to God's word and teach it accurately, no matter what stuff you feel like you're trudging through. I think the reason that he says that is because the next little piece that keeps coming up in 2 Timothy as well as in chapter 3 about false teachers again. Obviously, this is something Timothy is still struggling with in the church, like people from the church who are deceiving other people in the body of Christ astray. Again, the answer to that is value the true word of God and keep teaching it. Because you've got to fight against these guys, right? And so we get some more about that. That's 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. It's worth talking about, according to Paul to Timothy. So obviously it's something he's really, really dealing with. Probably one of the most famous sections of 2 Timothy is chapter 4. That's where we get the little slogan, preach the word, because that's exactly what Paul is telling Timothy. We've heard it twice in one chapter, chapter 2, chapter 3. Here we are in chapter 4. the driving home point is keep on preaching the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. That's probably one of the most famous things you'll ever hear out of 2 Timothy. And be strong and keep on teaching the word. While Paul is saying this to Timothy, remember, Timothy is younger. While Paul is saying this to Timothy, we see with what Paul's writing that Paul's time is looking less and less. Kind of, I don't know, impeding death. That's a little deep, but impending doom, impending death. That's where Paul sees that he's at the end of his missionary work, at the end of his life. And so he's really charging Timothy to keep on the work. And so kind of where we end the chapter is Paul reflects on his life and his ministry, and he shares that with Timothy and the church. And he says, I've fought the good fight and I've kept the faith. And this is all to keep on encouraging Timothy like a mentor in the faith, like a father and son relationship, like we've talked about a couple of times. So Paul kind of ends out the letter the way he did in 1 Timothy as well. He calls out and says thank you and sounds good to people in the church. Again, this was not just for Timothy, but for other people in the church. So he gives greetings to all of them and tells them how much he loves them, and basically just kind of signs off with his final greeting. 1 and 2 Timothy both are kind of short and sweet, but in the middle, after you have your greeting at the beginning and your greeting at the end, in the middle there's really valuable things for the church. And I think that's really important for us to realize, because that's exactly what Paul was doing. He was writing Timothy about important things in the church. So yeah. I lost my microphone person. Where's it at? It disappeared. Thank you. That's good. Riley, come run a microphone for me. Please.
So I read this passage in 2 Timothy 2:24, 25, and I thought, I should write this down on a piece of paper and have it in front of me each time I go online, and I get so upset. And it says, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach patiently, enduring evil. Because there's a lot of evil out there, a lot of people who are very evil, and they say some nasty things about God, and it's just so hard for me to be patient and kind to them. And correcting his opponents with gentleness, and God may perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth, and that they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. So I have to remember this, that I have to be patient, I have to be kind, even to the most vilest person, saying the most vilest things about God and Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And it makes it really serious on the Christian, for the Christian side of things, like you're talking about. That's the whole perspective you're talking about, right? But where you ended right there, I just love verse 26. That they may come to their senses. Okay, that's a little strong, right? So that they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil. Who is Paul writing to Timothy about that is apparently entrapped by the devil here? The brothers and the Christian, the child of God, right? And so sometimes we can read that and, okay, we get the fact that we need to practice forgiveness and patience and be strong in this way. But the reason why is powerful, because if you're not, you're being trapped by the devil and his lies, right? So this is all to escape the snare of the devil and not be captured by him. That's powerful. That's not Nancy, you're absolutely right. That's not a no big deal situation. That's how we got to live if we don't be caught by the devil. All right, go. Yeah.
If these people have accepted Jesus Christ, that he's talking to about this, how can they be so lost?
That's a good question, because we still can ask that question to ourselves sometimes, right?
For people who deny that God exists, or that Jesus was the Messiah, that he died and he was resurrected and came to life. I mean, that's pretty bad. These guys are Christians, they said Jesus Christ, but then they're like this.
Yeah, but I think, and I'm not trying to harsh on us though, I think Christians still to this day have that same struggle, right? And I don't know if anybody wrote a book about us and a little bit of tidbits about how we're being Christians, would we read it and be like, I thought these guys were supposed to be Christians. Shouldn't they know better? Shouldn't they be? And that's why I think these are valuable reminders, not just to Timothy, but to us about what looking like a Christian looks like. Because I don't want anybody to write a book about how we're messing up, because I think it would look very similar. All right, we got Dennis, then we'll have Courtney, and then we'll have Terry. 2:18? Oh, I got to finish my thought. Terry's got me on my toes here. 2:18. Who have swerved from the truth. I like that. Saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some. Yeah. People, yeah. And I mean, I want to say very strongly that can happen. Like, sometimes we read this and be like, how in the world did that happen? They thought that can happen. I think it's actively happening within our body, and sometimes we just ignore it. I mean, not trying to be too bold. I think it's there. Dennis, go for it.
We talk sometimes about small heroes or good people they ain't mentioned much. The household of Onesiphorus, verse 16, chapter 1. May the Lord grant mercy to the house of Onesiphorus. He often refreshed me, that is, he helped me, and probably with words and, who knows, lodging, food, spending money, who knows. For he did that, and he was not ashamed of my chains. I grew up in a preacher's house, and us kids couldn't do anything. We don't want to see cops driving up in front of our house. Well, as I got older, I started reading Jesus to the Communist World and Voice of the Martyrs, their books and publications, that there's Christians all over the world now, and a big chunk of it is not just communist, it's the Muslim thing, but we should be very proud that there are Christians that are willing to live and die for their faith and wear chains. And we should pray for them and be there with them, so to speak, and refresh them if we can. And but there's this thing out there, well, if they're in jail, they must have done something bad. You know, and that's a general thing all over the world, and it's an evil thought. We're supposed to think the best of our brothers and sisters, not the instant worst.
Yeah. Well, and I think Courtney, if you could get it to her, that'd be great. I think we, as Americans, we have a different perspective on that than the rest of the world, right? But yeah, I'm not sure. Onesiphorus. So we see, all that we see him doing, we don't know exactly what he did, but Paul uses the word refreshed me while I was in chains. And this is obviously a great big deal to Paul. He's like, may God bless his household for that, right? And so we don't know exactly what that looked like, but refreshed is kind of this picture of like provided for my needs and, you know, brought me food and deodorant in jail. That's how I see it in our modern context. And that meant a lot. That was a great work of God to Paul in that moment. And so on Dennis's point, sometimes we can also be like, oh, well, that's not a great work. That was a great work. Whatever refreshing in jail was, we might belittle. It's not worth belittling. Also, yeah, absolutely. And if you want an awesome Bible name, there you go. I would just love to see somebody name their kid. It's an encouraging name, but nobody would be able to say it at school. And so I think Courtney and I talked about that. I'm like, Oni, that would be a great name. Anyway. Onesiphorus. Go for it, Courtney.
I wanted to go back to Nancy's point because, there's like a lot of people that are, way off. But I think that reiterates the blessing that we have of the compiled Gospels of truth, you know. I think it's so interesting to look at the apocryphal, not look at them like study them, but like look at the kind of apocryphal texts that might have been floating around at this time. The Gnostics came along pretty early saying Jesus was not a man, he was a floaty little spirit. And he never came, and that's like, whoa, no, not right. And, you know, there's Gnostic Gospels that are apocryphal. They weren't truly written by the people that they claim to be like Gospel of Thomas, the guy who stuck his hands in the holes of Jesus's resurrected body, would know for sure that he was a physical man. And yet there is, quote unquote, the Gospel of Thomas, which is apocryphal. It is not correct. It is not gospel. But there's tons of those out there. And so, yeah, like, and it wasn't like you could just be like, excuse me, Mr. Gnostic. If you go to First Titus, or just Titus, if you go to Titus, you can see that it says he was a man fully God and fully human. Like, that wasn't, they were debating, they were talking, and they were figuring it out, and by the inspiration of God. And a lot of people left the faith. They went that Gnostic route, which is no good. But I think that's why there's so many rebukes to, excuse me, I'm so sorry. But it talks constantly about don't quarrel, don't debate over silly myths, don't be led away by this. I mean, it's repeated over and over and over and over again. And when I look at that, I'm like, it makes me think of, I will die on the hill that heaven is not all white. It's going to have colors. But you know what? That's a silly, irreverent myth, too. I mean, I think I have proof. But if it's causing you to stumble, I'll back off. I just won't talk about it. But yeah, it's just interesting to think about the history going on at the time, that they didn't have the Bible, and that's such a cool thing that we have to keep us right in line, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and what Terry pointed out a second ago is those who have swerved from the faith in chapter 2, verse 18, we see a little bit more about what that false teaching or what their thoughts are, right? Is that the resurrection has already happened. So now we've got another different layer to this, kind of the same thing, but another different layer of people that are trying to cause division, whether they realize that's what they're doing or not, right? All right, anything else out of 2 Timothy? Dennis, Riley, you want to get it to him?
Yeah, we have talked about it some, but I mean, one of our favorite verses is 2 Timothy 2:15 about study, just keep studying and so on. But above that, then several verses later, we read a couple of times, don't get involved in arguments and quarrels about words and all, that are to no profit and stuff. And I just kind of wonder what that means, knowing our brotherhood and all of Christianity's history, because what somebody might call a quarrel, strifes about words, somebody else might call it a diligent search and battle for the truth. So I'm kind of confused on what that means exactly, and to what extent those two verses, the one just above 2:15 and one about 6 or 8 verses later says it again. And where do we draw the line? What is intense wrestling out truth and wrestling away falsehood versus quarrels with no value except for to split churches?
Okay, and I'm going to take us to Titus there too, because Titus is going to say it as well. Or Paul's going to say it to Titus as well. 4:2. Yeah, preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort, and with complete patience in teaching. I mean, complete patience, again. Yeah.
Over words.
Yeah, and then, okay, so, and this is kind of a good transition to Titus, because Courtney and I had talked about this when we caught this little last piece of Titus too, but Titus chapter 3, verse 9, but avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. As for the person who stirs up division, after warning him once, then twice, have nothing more to do with him. That's connected to all of that too, right? So over here in Timothy, in multiple different ways, and not just in Timothy, we get this warning about don't be that person. Then the Titus side of things, we get what to do with that person. No matter what you take away from it, that person's not something that's being praised, right? The person that's causing arguments is somebody that we don't want to be. Either side of the coin here, right? If you're the person that's been talked to once or twice and then just kicked out, you don't want to be that person. And so Dennis's kind of point is, in our time, in our slice of culture right now, we love to disagree. But what does it matter about? And where does that become important versus not important? That's a tough question. And I think that's the reason why we have so much division sometimes, right? Because one person says, this is the exception to the rule. This is a salvation issue is probably the word they'd use, right? This is the exception to the rule. This doesn't fit into quarrels and arguments about the law. This is the rule. And then we have a new division, right? And so we get stuck in that. Yeah?
In fact, some go so far as to say not only, or to make it that not only because of certain arguments division will happen, we're going to see to it.
That
We're
it
going
does
to
happen.
disfellowship them. We're going to drive them away. We're going to say they ain't Christians. What I'm saying, instead of just the division just being a byproduct of disagreement, it becomes a command and a to-do thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see that. All right, that's a good transition to Titus, because we got to talk about Titus just a little bit today. Titus is teeny, though. 3 chapters, but just barely, right? It's like, you're like, well, this has to be a 3-chapter paper, and he's on my Bible. It's like, well, all right, that's enough. We'll just wrap her up right there, chapter 3. 3 chapters of Titus. Some things that you have seen Paul say to Timothy, also we see being given to Titus, right? And so Paul's writing this while he's in prison as well, and he left Timothy in Ephesus. That's where Timothy's at, right? And Titus is probably, if you look at history, I mean, he's in Crete. And so if we have Timothy over in Ephesus, we have Titus over in Crete, where you can see some of this, not all of this, but some of this is in the book of Acts, right? And you see some of these missionary journeys, you see people popping in and out. Titus is one of those people that accompanied Paul on the missionary journey. They went to Crete. And so now we have this letter to Titus, kind of in the same position as Timothy, if you want to use that word. I don't know if we want to give positions or not, but he's working with Christians, working with the church, younger person. What is the encouragement and what is the information that Paul should write? Well, one of those same things is what he wrote to Timothy about appointing elders in the church, in the body of Christ. That's right there in chapter 1 of Titus. So if you ever sit down for a class about elders, you know where you're going to be? 1 Timothy and Titus. That's going to be 99% of your class right there, because you'll just pop around and find the word shepherd or presbyter or whatever in a couple other places, but you'll mainly hang out 1 Timothy and Titus, because that's where we get all of this information about elders. But it's not just about elders that Paul wants to write to Titus about. If you look at chapter 2, there's instructions for everybody. There's instructions for the Christian community as a whole. There's instructions for older men, older women, younger women, slaves. All of these people don't get excluded from living a Christian life. There's instruction for them on how they ought to do it too, right? Slaves are to honor their masters and not steal from them. It's not mind-blowing information, but it kind of is at the same time when you're a slave and you're oppressed and you're held by that literally bondage. And so there's practical pieces for the people of the church in the first 2 chapters. That's what I call the first 2 chapters. So those are really practical for us. And then you get to chapter 3. It kind of brings the message to a whole, right? The foolish controversies part that we just read is in there. And the idea of refocusing on what God has done for you, the salvation that God has given. So there's instructions for all these people to do. There's the fact of we need to not be stuck in controversies, but instead we need to focus on the gospel, right? The salvation that's been given to us, the grace that we have, and all of this is going to be done in us through the Holy Spirit. Bringing it all to the point of the matter right there in chapter 3. And so, Titus, short and sweet, but again, practical stuff for the church. All right. Any 2-minute comments on Titus? I actually think Titus is really good, and I think we don't talk about Titus enough. Maybe because it's just kind of small and neglected and forgotten about. Yeah. I do want to tie this up. All right, we will wrap up there. Oh, yeah, we get to move on into 2 fresh books as the beginning of this week. Philemon's even smaller. We'll be through him probably in a day. I haven't looked. Is he 1 day or 2 days? Yeah, Nancy.
Okay, so
No.
because
So-
I seen this layout, the major
Major
prophets,
prophets?
and Lamentations was listed as a major prophet.
Interesting. Was that a like a chart?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, yeah. So it's just Jeremiah continued. This is his sad side. So, yeah, Lamentations. It's kind of funny because its name is literally the description you need, right? These are the songs of lament. These are the Lamentations, and so that's just kind of like if we would call, yeah, It's just like the collection we call the collection of Psalms. This is the Psalms, right? This is the collection of the laments, and like Terry's saying, whether Jeremiah is credited as author on all of them or not, we don't know. But that's probably why they put it in with the prophet, because it's just like more Jeremiah. I don't know. Yeah, Dennis? Yeah, and writings, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's probably because they're throwing it with Jeremiah. All right. Yeah, we'll pick up with Lamentations next week. Yeah. All right. See you guys in a second.